You're listening to the Perth Property Show, Australia's only weekly property podcast by West Australian experts for West Australian listeners. Catch your latest episode every Monday at 7 a.m.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Perth Property Show. My name is Trent Fleskens, your host as always. Today we are talking hot or not with my favourite guest, Brendon Ptolomey, Managing Director of Heron Todd White. How you going, mate?
G'day, Trent. I'm well. I'm frantic in terms of looking at this market. My head's spinning. But let's try and break it down and go through the hot or not of all the suburbs around Perth.
Firstly, you've been getting a lot of work recently, haven't you?
Yeah, look, as I say, we're pretty frantic out there at the moment. And we're at the confluence of work coming because of construction loan grants. So we saw a lot of that pressure pre-Christmas, but there's still flowing through. Then we're seeing purchase activity, so people out there buying properties and obviously getting finance, and so those finance deals or contract of sale deals flow through to us from the banks. And the other thing we're just starting to see is the refinance work. So obviously lots of people would be very conscious of interest rates dropping. I think you might know better than me. Current record rate, I heard a 1.88 fixed for 4 years. I think now there's a 1.79.
Yeah, there's some random bank in Sydney that
Yeah.
only funds Sydney-based properties for like 1.7 something.
Yeah.
We can't even access that here in Perth. But it
Yeah.
is funny how, it's a 1 year special and they stuff you on the back end. But
Yep.
it's amazing to even just suggest that what would have previously been a really bad term deposit rate is now a really good interest rate.
It's phenomenal. And I suppose, in terms of advice to listeners, certainly should be checking their mortgage rate and looking to hit their bank up, whether it's an existing or a new bank, and just say, hey, look, am I on the best rate? Yeah.
Well, we're pretty much at double transactions year on year, where we're doing 500s last year per week. Now we're doing 1,000s per week at the moment. Mr. Heron, Mr. Todd, and Mr. White must be rolling in money, I would have thought.
I don't know where Kerry Heron is at the minute. He would be playing with his farms in Queensland somewhere.
Yeah.
Alan Todd's passed away, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And Glenn White has just sold his shares down in Acumentus, so I'm not sure what he's up to at the moment.
Yeah. Well, the point being that with all that volume, there's just a lot of work going around. A lot of real estate agents making a lot of money selling and moving property. A lot of settlement agents getting a lot of work. A lot of mortgage brokers, and also the valuers. Just that much volume coming in. What it means is just generally in the property industry is just a lot of buzz, and another industry where there's probably going to be some more disposable income, and people that work in property also like to invest in property as well. So hopefully some more investors coming into the market.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Our workforce is up by 20% since July last year.
Does that mean that they were slacking off the year before, or that you're stretching them too much now? Because you're going to put 20% with a 50% increase.
No, so our volume hasn't increased by 50%, but probably just want to do a shout out to the government in terms of the grants. That's direct stimulus has ended up in jobs in our business. So that's 20 people that have got a job now that wouldn't have had a job, obviously, in the last year or two.
Great.
Some of those are graduates as well. So they've got a job for probably in their career as long as they want it, essentially.
Yeah, fantastic.
Shouldn't tell them that because they'll come and ask for a pay rise or something. But, so it's a fantastic story, and it's probably something that obviously in the election cycle might not be on the front page of the paper, but the grants have had the effect in terms of creating those jobs out there.
Yeah, jobs people don't think about. Everyone thinks about the tradies, but there are also a lot of professionals getting work.
Yep.
Hot or not, we've never done this before, but it's a cool idea that you had. Instead of just giving a general update, and which would be really quick this time, of just saying, things are good, cheers.
Yeah.
Let's be a bit more specific and go around the table, and you've actually gone around the table with your team of valuers, haven't you?
Yeah, so we've got over 35 valuers in our business. They're all over the state every day of the week. Last Monday, we had 4 people flying out of the airport. We were going to places like Esperance, Geraldton, Carnarvon and Newman for the day to go and do our work. But in Perth Metro, we've got valuers in suburbs all over Perth every single day. We've got our finger on the pulse. We are upfront concerned about the activity out there in terms of it being a little bit too overheated, but we don't run the market. We don't call the market. We just analyse the market. So,
does your job get easier or harder right now? I
Right
assume
now,
that your insurance policy might get a bit cheaper.
Our insurance is extremely expensive, but so it gets harder in this market right at this point in time because we're in a part of the cycle where it's moving so quickly that we have to get the sales evidence as quickly as we can. We have to analyse that and make sure we have the most recent settled sales evidence. We also have to be talking to agents to understand what the market's doing, as in, did that sale last weekend get another 10, 20, 30 grand or 5 or 10% above
So
what we
stuff
saw
that
the
hasn't
week
even
before?
settled. You're allowed to use that stuff.
Yeah, so we can consider those under offer sales in our valuations. And the pressure that we're under all the time is to get that value right.
Yeah.
And we can't just be conservative and turn around and say, hey, we think it's worth X dollars. We need to follow the market, because that's what the definition of market value says.
So your guys have to work harder now because they actually have to take initiative to go out and talk to agents where stuff isn't just sitting on Landgate or RP data. It might be in the middle and live right now, getting settled at the moment.
Yeah.
Are you seeing situations where you're having to say, look, this is too heated, we can't support this bank, I'm sorry? Or you're trying to support what is most obvious to most people in the market, a structural shift in prices?
Yeah, so we'll support that structural shift when we see the definitive evidence. So we want to see one sale. We also want to see another sale. We also want to understand what's happened in the transaction. So was there one-off buyer buying something for X dollars, or were there three, which is often the story. You'll see those stories at the moment. There's three offers and they're all around about X dollars, and so it sold for that, and we took the best structured offer for the vendor. So what we are seeing also every single day are contracts being knocked back, and that's how we talk about it. So we can't get it up to the value that the contract says, and that's essentially sales evidence that we're using to say, and the under offer sales and the location, and we're going back to the bank and saying, this place might have an offer on it for $700,000, but we can't support that. We've valued it at $600,000.
So do you have any examples of where those are right now, where it's sort of not just hot, but just red hot, chili hot, too hot?
Yeah, it's just individual transactions in lots of suburbs. Most recently, I saw one in North Fremantle, which was interesting.
That's an area that you would have thought you could support, given that it is, quite a blue chip suburb.
Yeah, and so it's probably interesting just to have a look at that scenario. So the product wasn't your average type product in there. It was trying to be sold for a number that was the next level up. So we're talking about an oldish apartment type product that was being sold at a townhouse type product value. And so essentially it's the case of the market getting ahead of itself, and potentially the purchaser not educating themselves about the difference between the subject property and some of the other properties that are transacted in the area.
What you're saying is there's a bit of a risk to be the first mover as a buyer to try and lock down that house. Even if you're fully loaded, money's not a problem for you. You still need the support of Brendon's team, or any of the valuers in Perth that end up with the valuation.
Yeah. And
if you want a loan.
Yeah, exactly. So
if you're buying cash, well, then do what you want.
Yeah, spot on. And so I suppose a lesson there for listeners would be to make sure they've got their finance and the parameters of their finance lined up before they start getting a little bit out of control on offers. And whilst that sounds really logical, what's happening out there is people are getting out of control on offers because there's a competitive process, and we're in FOMO land, where they are really got a massive fear of missing out on the next place that they go to buy.
I think we should probably split it up into three sections, not just what's hot or what's not, but also what's really hot.
Okay.
So, Brendon, what's really hot?
Well, talking to a couple of agents in Cottesloe, they think that that's the hottest marketplace at the moment.
Do you agree?
Oh, yeah, look, we're seeing some pretty ridiculous transactions in there. If you put on your conservative analyst valuer's hat, and what we've been doing in there is looking at some of the listings and before it sells, saying to ourselves, right, what do we think that's going to sell for? Things are selling consistently for 10 and 20% more than what we thought we would value it at. So that says the market's moved. That feedback's coming from agents who are operating in neighbouring suburbs. So they're operating in Dalkeith and Nedlands and Florets and those kinds of locations.
Is that a good thing? We've said a number of times on this podcast that the smart money moves first. Yep. And I've always said the smart money starts in Cottesloe and emanates out. So if Cottesloe can't have a structural shift in prices, then logically neither can the rest of the whole state.
Yep.
So if we're seeing 10, 20% where the smart money is and they're moving first, is that not just a good sign for the rest of Perth that will really, over the next couple of years, we should see the same filter down?
Yeah, you'd hope so. The encouraging thing about this market movement is that it does seem to be going all the way down to the bottom of the market. And so just to clear up the cot factor, the market in there is easy 20 to 30% above where it was in the middle of last year or this time last year, if you want to draw those comparisons. And white hot in terms of multiple offers on every single property, places being sold off-market transactions or the first weekend they're open, all of those types of scenarios that we hear when the market goes crazy. Massive fear of missing out in there. Not sure about sustainability. I don't have a crystal ball, but there's a massive lack of supply and a very good demand.
Is it above 2014 prices?
So there's one sale that we've analysed in there that, funnily enough, was an '08 sale. So let's go back to that previous peak in the cycle. Really decent money for back then, looking at the product. And, very good product. We're talking around the 4 million mark. And that is resold now. Now, haven't been able to confirm the sale price yet, which is where agents need to be a little bit cagey about information on their clients. And we'll see what it sold for once it settles. But it looks to me like that's sold for over 4 million now. And it was under 4 million in the '08 peak of the market.
Yeah, and look, whilst Cottesloe, I would agree, is the hottest market in Perth right now, and there's a lot of money flowing around there from places. People question, where was that money a year and a half ago? I'm also seeing similar records being hit in normal suburbs as well. So I think we're getting at least back to our 2014 very quickly. But it is crazy how only 6 months ago we were not in this situation. And in a lot of suburbs, which we'll talk about today, I have seen like for like a good 20-25% rise in prices in 6 months.
Yeah.
It's so hard to justify.
Yep. Yeah, and that's our concern as valuers, because the switch was flicked so quickly in 6 months, where we've seen these blips before. We understand how they work, the 2013 one and the 2014 one, and they were quite localized, some of those peaks in the market activity. You could actually say, well, I remember back then we'd talk about, say, Como and South Perth had this crazy little blip where all the stock got cleaned out really quickly, and it didn't matter whether it was a villa or a single residential dwelling. Everyone came for those locations. This time round, within 6 months, pretty much every single suburb in Perth has gone nuts across almost all products.
We've been calling this, though, since the 2nd of December 2018, I think it was.
Yep.
It's not just a derivative of the build-up of what we thought was quite a prudent calling 3 years ago.
Yeah, it's really interesting to go back and have a look at the answer that we were giving everybody: go and buy something. And we were pretty forthright on that, I thought.
Yeah, well, I bought in March 2019.
Yep, yeah. It's really interesting, in my mind, watching people go to buy, how they move their way through that process, how long it takes some people, how their decision-making process works, how desperate they get. And I suppose if you look at that period between December 2018 and now, maybe people needed to be a little bit more desperate back in 18 and 19 and a little bit more confident.
That's trigger shy at the end of the day, because I think they're paying for it now. If they, in a more orderly fashion, were making purchases over the last couple of years, they wouldn't feel so desperate now. But it is really a derivative of also the rental market.
Yep.
What else is hot?
Yeah, so flicking out from there, that first wave of the ripple, so out into Nedlands, Dalkeith, round into Floreat, Churchlands, we're seeing some contracts in there that are really, really intense in terms of values, and they're definitively moving underlying land value upwards by, we're probably talking blocks through, say, Floreat, around the 1.3 to 1.5 mark underlying land value for a decent single residential site. They're starting to look more like 1.7s at the minute. So underlying land value moving really quickly in those locations. And you can translate that over into Dalkeith and Nedlands as well. Yeah. And they're big numbers, They're big numbers for those locations. Yeah.
All right, next.
So the wave keeps going. So you go into Mount Hawthorn and over into Mount Lawley. Mount Hawthorn, our valuer in there is saying it's definitively up by 30%. Crazy activity happening, multiple offers on houses. Obviously slightly different product in terms of being a lot of heritage type housing through there.
Different buyers.
Yeah, slightly different buyers, but really intense market through there as well. Yep.
What about if we start emanating about 15 k's out of the city? Let's talk suburbs like Duncraig, like Padbury, like Hillary's, and in the south, suburbs like Bull Creek, Leeming, Willerton, Riverton, these sort of areas. My perspective is they're hot. Are they Cottesloe hot?
Yeah, look, I think they are. And it's interesting that southern corridor was one of the places that we first heard the stories back from agents agents that we deal with all the time saying, look, I've given up doing home opens. They're too intense. How can I say to my vendor that there's going to be 100 people through your house on Saturday morning?
You ruin the house.
Yep.
You need a carpet cleaner every Sunday morning.
Exactly. And just imagine being that vendor. So you go off for a coffee and come back an hour later, and it's like you've had a concert at your house or something. So they started the process down there through Willerton, Leeming, Bull Creek, those locations of having to be a registered buyer, getting the email to say, look, this home is on the market. Here's the listing. Take a look at the photos online. If that is in your wheelhouse in terms of something that you're interested in, I'll create a short list of potential buyers. We'll then go through to the inspection process with the top 10 or 20 people, and I want to know that you're pre-qualified for finance and you can afford this, and then we'll get to offers. So those markets, that story is probably back from a kind of January, maybe even December type story where those markets were moving really quickly. That's when we heard that information.
That I've noticed as well, the market step change really was after Christmas. I think everyone has come back from Dunsborough and realised they've got a lot more money in their bank account.
We've got some good cliches going today,
we
haven't
do.
we?
I love the cliches. Pretty much since the first week of January, the second week of January, I noticed that it's just become mental.
Yep.
Mental. And most of the agents I speak to, they don't write offers anymore.
Yep.
They will say, just email me, here's a form, a DocuSign form, what sort of thing. Email me whatever it is the number is.
Yep.
And the person who puts the number one offer up, then they will write an offer with that person. Which isn't even really legal, to be honest. But because it's become so burdensome in an administrative point of view for the agents, they can't write 40 offers.
No.
They don't have the time.
Yeah, exactly.
They're moving so much stock so quickly.
Yep.
The days on market these days, which I spoke about last week, you've got suburbs that are sitting at 7, 8, 9 days on market on average.
Yeah.
Which means most of the good stuff selling in 1, 2, 3 days.
Yep.
So the issue for most agents is not finding people to buy their homes anymore. It's finding listings.
That's interesting to pause on in terms of watching some of the listings coming to the market. So we've been mildly surprised by the idea that how long a vendor will sit on a property. So you can see that in some of the transactions in all of those locations that we've just talked about, where a family's just said, well, that is our main asset, and we're not going to sell this thing until we see this market move again. And we've got our next plan. We're going to move to an apartment, or we're going to a retirement home, or we're actually sitting in a deceased estate type property. But people are prepared to be really patient when it comes to those assets and wait for the market to move.
What's not hot? What's cold? Or what's lukewarm, I should say? Nothing's probably cold.
So apartments are still lukewarm, but they are just starting to move. I think in the last month or so, we've just started to see people move into them. And again, this is the fear of missing out ripple, moving on to the next product. So I'm an investor in the market. I've missed out on a single residential dwelling, or development sites have become so hot. I know the rental market is overheated. I know that the return is going up. I get no money from the bank for my interest on my savings. So what's the next asset I buy? And I'm going to buy an apartment.
So are these used apartments?
Well, interestingly, good story back from one of our valuers that operates through the circle around Perth, so to speak, so the near city locations.
Rivervale, Maylands, West Perth, East Perth.
Yeah, East Perth, West Perth, into West Leederville, those types of locations. So what they've found is that some of those developers had stock, brand new stock, that might be 3 or 4 years old in complexes, that they just locked the door on. Obviously, they didn't want to rent them out because then it becomes used stock, so they can still sell that stock as classified as brand new. What it looks to us has happened is the developer has waited for the value to kick above, say, $400,000. Right, we'll sell that one better now because we didn't want to sell them at $350 or $375 or $385 or whatever the number was. Yeah,
that's really interesting. It's quite a unique situation.
I can't remember
sitting
Perth
on
having
assets.
A market like that. And I do remember us talking about the idea of having an oversupply of apartments in the past when the stock was being built. Obviously, planning changes have made sure that we don't have an oversupply, and maybe it's something that we should be wishing for. When you look at Subiaco and the hole in the ground over there, and the concrete core of that building going up that Blackburn are doing, you think, wow, if that planning had been organised earlier, that supply would be right in the right place at the right time when the market's moving.
Very true. What about the suburbs you generally wouldn't be running towards? Let's throw some ones out like a Lockridge and a Balga, an Armidale, a Parmelia, Kwinana, Leader, Camillo, all those suburbs that are usually the cheapest in Perth. they got really dumped in the last couple of years. There was stuff in Armidale that was selling for 90 grand, like family homes. I've seen some stats arbitrarily, which generally isn't great information because it's off of really small amounts of numbers saying, oh, these suburbs have grown 30%, when it's pretty easy to go from 90 to 120, it's still super cheap, right?
Yeah, and we'll see those stats come soon, I think. One of the interesting parts about seeing the media trying to write up their current heat is that they don't seem to have any decent stats out of REWA or CoreLogic on the median house price numbers moving very quickly. So they haven't flowed through. The other thing just to touch on quickly is that those under-offer sales are not settling very quickly because the banks are backlogged with applications, and it's taking a while to get finance approved. So where a sale might settle within a month, in the past, it's now taking 2 and 3 months. So that's affecting the statistics flowing through into the system. Back to the Southeast Corridor and some of those sort of unloved suburbs that you just mentioned. We knew that the market was really struggling when we were doing our mortgagee in possession type valuations for some of our clients. And after 3 months, the value would have to go back and redo the valuation and the number would go down again. And so some of those examples in Armidale where we were hitting 175, I remember the day that we went below 200 and we were all sitting around the office going, is this okay? Like, is it all right to value it?
For that.
Yeah.
Let alone the land value.
Yeah, and we would sit there and say, well, what's the underlying land value of this? What are the improvements worth? And I'm not trying to be flippant here, but that type of asset value in a city in Australia is pretty amazing. In a very livable suburb, lots of people love living in Armidale. They love that southeast corridor. Byford itself is one of the most popular estates around. So it's been really interesting to watch that drop out. And they're all back easy by 10-20%. Yeah.
Even the suburbs that people have been neglecting for so long have also just popped up 10-20%. I use Balga as an example. The development blocks that were there, you nearly couldn't get them away for 300 grand a year and a half ago.
Yep.
Now agents are brashly trying to list them for 400.
Yep. Yeah.
Just overnight.
Yeah.
And you go, come on, mate, you're having a laugh.
Yeah. And so, again, listeners should just be really careful about people spitballing numbers out there. Vendors are going to go and have a crack, and the agents are going to be more than happy to grab a listing. They're going to be struggling to get listings, so they're going to take anything and try anything on, essentially. So, as we've always said, through the down market, in the up market, try and do your research, get some professional advice.
I know that your job is to be risk conservative, but in a market like this, is it more risky to sit back and watch it because you are quite conservative and you don't really believe what's going on? I know we don't have a crystal ball, or is it more risky to pay that extra little bit just to get on the ladder with the view that, yes, we are about to double in prices in the next 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, well...
Because that's a huge assumption, but it's one that a lot of data is pointing to, in my opinion.
Yeah, so I suppose every buyer is different. I would encourage everyone to sit down and nut out their motivations. Why am I buying this property? Everyone's got a different purpose there.
Is it to make money or is it to have a home?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And so anyone looking to have a home that can handle the debt that is required to buy the property.
Especially with these really cheap interest rates.
Exactly.
Right now.
So my advice to friends lots of time when they're buying, usually not in a market as hot as this, is, if it's another 20, 30, 50K for the place that you really want, then you go and offer that if that's what you decide it's worth.
Yep.
Because you've obviously walked through it together. If it's a family home, the whole family have walked through it and said, this is the one we want, this is the location we want to be in. You've got 30 years to pay that extra 50K off. Now, having said that, this is the market where you don't want to be walking in the door and offering the extra 50, 100K just because the interest rates are 2%. You want to make sure that you've done your servicing calculations on, 4, 5, 6% interest rates to make sure you're solid for the future. Yeah.
It is something that I grapple with at the moment a lot. My job is to buy good valued properties, especially in the development space. And my job generally is to say no 99 out of 100 times.
Yep.
And what I'm finding is it's very, very hard to say yes right now with clients' money, because what we have seen, especially the information that you're talking about, are a lot of owner-occupied homes.
Yep.
And a lot of development blocks. And these are the ones that are representing the sales that are doing very, very well, the stuff you're scratching your eyes at, right?
Yep.
But what we haven't seen yet move as fast, and I'll get your opinion on this, is the unit market, the townhouse market, it's
Yep.
probably moved a little bit. It's probably moved 5% in my opinion, but it hasn't moved 15, 20% in the last 6 months.
No, spot on. And so that might be an opportunity for investors to look at, might be an opportunity for first home buyers that have missed out on grants or don't want to build a house or don't want to live in a new suburb. There's still opportunities there. We don't want to get everyone rushing to that market, but the realistic angle here is to step back from what's going on in terms of single residential properties and say, well, where does the money go to next? And in any city around the world, in particular, if you look at Sydney and Melbourne, people change their idea on how they're going to live. They go, well, I can't live in a single residential house and have a shed out the back and all that kind of stuff.
The culture shifts by necessity.
Yeah, exactly. And so you end up with townhouse options, unit options, apartment options. And so why not go looking there whilst it's still not overheated? Yeah.
I think personally that the fact that 47% of Sydney's residential market is now apartments is not a reflection of people's preferences, but the shift in culture due to necessity of price point. And that's all. If I think most people, if they had a choice, would probably be in a nice big single dwelling home, but they just can't afford it. And it's a product of the fact that prices are double and they make no more than we do.
Yeah, spot on. And there is restriction on supply. And so that's something that we can look at from this coast into Sydney and say, well, Perth over the last 50 years has never had a restriction on supply. Our planning laws have said that we can just keep going north of Yanship and cutting up land and creating blocks. We can keep going to Mandurah and we can keep going out to the hills. Guess what? Here we are now. We're actually at critical stage and there is some more in Globo land out there and we've got a decent amount of supply, easy another 10, 20 years of supply out there. But we know where those boundaries are now and we know that pretty much every developer has gone and bought all of that land up and is sitting on it for the future, but it means that we get that little bit closer to that Sydney market, to that structural change where the options of going to buy your block of dirt in the extremities of Perth metro area and building your house will not be the option that's there for the next generation, essentially. Yeah.
Does that mean we can look at Sydney as our crystal ball?
Yeah, it's hard because Sydney has a really hard border around it physically.
Like topographically, you mean?
Yes, yeah, exactly. And so
don't we as well with our hills?
Yeah. I tend to think that Perth, the big difference here is just the amount of density that would be available to upscale in our existing suburbs. So there's a lot of supply within there to come into the future, and that should keep a rein on values into the future.
Every time someone develops a family home into a triplex or townhouses, that's one less family home available.
Yeah.
Right? Shortening supply again and again and again in the suburbs and, slowly into the western suburbs as well, where the major option going forward will not be the 4x2 or the 4x1 or the 3x1 on 1,000 square meters. It will be a townhouse or a villa. That will be the predominant asset class in property one day.
Yeah, absolutely. Back to that original question, you say, well, why wouldn't I go and buy something now and move to that next lifestyle, as in the near city apartment, townhouse type lifestyle? Yep.
To round this out, we've spoken about a lot of properties representing nearly eliminated downside risk.
Yep.
And a lot of blue sky. Are there any places you would suggest in Perth where you would say, you know what, I still wouldn't buy there?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So before I answer that question, there is one category that we probably could touch on as well, and that's that lifestyle type property. Again, really hot market. So I'm thinking here, Southeast Corridor, where you get your lifestyle type properties, some horse type properties, those kinds of things, around up into the hills where places like Darlington are white hot at the minute. Even the base of the hills in Martin, we're seeing some really strong values in there. And that's that reaction that's been in the media a lot about people going, oh, gee, post-COVID, bigger block, I want to be in the tree change environment.
Your Boyers, your Lesmurdies, your Kalamunders.
Yeah, and some people in those locations have always lived there and saying, looking back down the plain and the beautiful view from it there, saying, well, why isn't Gooseberry Hill going crazy?
Why isn't this Bel Air? Why isn't this Hollywood Hills?
Exactly. Yeah. And so, their moment in the sun and the white hot heat of the market is with them now too. Yeah. So where wouldn't we buy it? I suppose there's no suburbs that I'd be bold enough to single out and say don't buy there, because I don't want to end up
where do
in
you
Kim
think
McDonald's.
Where do you think will underperform compared to the rest of the market over the next swing?
Yeah.
I think we're both on the same page now that we have been justified in our 2.5 year ago Oracle views. Finally, the rest of the market has seen it and moved really quickly since Christmas. But there will always be really in markets like this where everyone's winning, there will be places that are winning massively and places that are really just hitting inflation or just above that.
Yeah.
Where are they?
Those newer suburbs are still a concern for us, because you're bringing a massive amount of supply, although those new houses there that are being built with grant money or have been encouraged because of grant money, you clearly will have 2020, 2021, 2022 built houses everywhere in those newer suburbs, and not all of them end up being a happy family home. You know, some of that supply will end up on the market, and there's a good chance they all end up on the market at the same time. So you're creating large supply where there may not be strong demand into the future. Yeah.
Okay. I would rationalise that by saying that I think the growth in values in these suburbs comes purely from credit loosening, that as credit has loosened 20-30%, we will see those suburbs probably just rise artificially by 20 or 30%.
Yeah.
But the inherent value based on the demand versus supply relationship is probably never going to grow in that time frame. But we will still see nominally prices grow. But the second that the interest rates increase again, those values start dropping again, because the serviceability of people in that area start dropping as well.
Yeah.
We haven't seen a fundamental basis of increase in value.
Yep.
So that's where I agree, the risk is there as well, where we're going to see naysayers say, oh no, price is rising. It's because the credit is so cheap. That's the only reason.
Yeah.
And they'll be the first to drop as well when the interest rates start going up, unfortunately.
Yeah, spot on. Yep.
And I guess that is a perfect example of proving that, to finish off, is a suburb like Wembley Downs. Even in the drop over the last 5 years, has actually not dropped in value once.
Yeah.
Based on a very tight demand versus supply situation.
Yeah. So solid locational fundamentals, good stock, good product, variation in product too, or a variety of product there in terms of subdivided lots and original family homes, and good local facilities and infrastructure around it. Yep.
Brendos, thank you very much, mate. It's been very fun.
Hopefully there's some ideas there for people.
Yeah. I think the idea is if you stick within urban infill areas, you stick within the first 20 k's of the city, whether you're buying a development block, an owner-occupier block, or even townhouses and things like that, all of it's probably, in my opinion, going to go up at different rates, just based on the cheap credit, but also the crazy demand-supply situation, both the rental market and the buying market.
Yep.
If you are thinking about getting on the wave, I would suggest you get on that wave, but make sure you're doing it with good quality stock in areas that aren't the worst houses, the shitty blocks, the slope. Still try and stick to those fundamentals we always have.
Yeah. Good advice.
Thanks,
Cheers,
mate.
Trent.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Perth Property Show. If you've only just joined the conversation, you can catch up by heading over to our website, perthpropertyshow.com.au, subscribing to the podcast, or joining our Facebook page. Don't forget to tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. for more expert insights, local analysis, and suburb spotlights. Happy hunting!